now we're going to have, for the grand finale of our stage programming, Grant Achatz is known for his groundbreaking approach to cuisine at Alinea. He's one of the hottest chefs in the country, if not the planet today. Most everything about the dining experience is reimagined, from the entrance to the table settings to the menu format to the service-ware. If you haven't been, maybe you've seen pictures. It's like nothing I've ever seen before, that's for sure. Today he's going to talk about how and why he breaks the traditional dining molds. And I believe he'll be using his unusual service pieces as a jumping off point. Achatz collaborates with Martin Kastner of Crucial Detail Design Studio to make atypical service pieces that help turn his food into art. But they serve functional needs as well. We're going to have a Q&A afterwards, so stay tuned for all that. And without any further ado, Chef, the dais is yours.
Good to go? Beautiful. All right, so I wanted to first and foremost thank everybody here for having the stamina to make it to the end of this weekend. I know it's probably been a couple of long nights in a row, a lot of learning, a lot of networking, perhaps in some people's cases a lot of partying, a lot of drinking. But here we are, we're at the end, and for myself, the chef de partie that I brought with me, it's been a great weekend. We had the opportunity to see and learn a lot of different things. So for that, we're very appreciative. I think we, as a group, collectively, whether you are a presenter or somebody that came to the Congress to watch, there we go. To watch people put forth new ideas and new concepts and teach us different things. I think we all collectively should be appreciative that this sort of venue exists for us in this country. It's obviously very popular in Europe, has been for a couple of years. Antoinette mentioned Spain, kind of leading the charge in these culinary congresses, and really the only one that exists here in this country, and I think we should all be thankful that, in fact, we have this opportunity. So I know, just like running a kitchen, running a restaurant every night, putting forth a service, tremendous amount of work, tremendous amount of dedication, vision, and teamwork is required to pull something like this off. And I think they all deserve a round of applause, everybody at StarChefs, for making this happen for us. There we go. All right. I had an idea of what I was going to talk about, and I'll get there eventually. But something came up here at the Congress on Sunday with a group of 3 gentlemen that were sitting up here that I feel I need to address. For those of you that were here, you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. For those of you that weren't here, you'll probably be able to figure it out by what I have to say. It's always very challenging for us chefs to figure out what to talk about at these congresses. We come here in front of our peers, we subject ourselves, we expose ourselves in an effort to perpetuate cuisine, in an effort to bring it forward and share. So it's always a bit of a challenge. What do I show? What do I show that's new? How can I excite Wiley? You know, how can I excite a cook from San Francisco, and how can I do myself justice and the cooks at Alinea. So it's a challenge. Unfortunately, it didn't seem to be a challenge to roast a particular chef or a particular cooking style. Now, you know, it's interesting to me that these congresses are basically built on the energy that surrounds professionalism, creativity, and respect. And it was an interesting start to a weekend Congress that holds those standards as their own. Anyway, maybe in fact they're right. Maybe the food that I produce, Wiley produces, Ferran produces, Heston produces, and if we're going to talk about multi-course tasting menus, maybe we include Charlie Trotter, maybe we include Thomas Keller, maybe we include restaurants like Mugarit's, Noma, Jean-Georges. I don't think I need to list any more. I will. And if in fact that's the case, then we should just shut them all down. We should just shut them all down. Because in fact, they're not important, right? The best restaurants in the world, in fact, are not important. Now, I don't want to spend an hour up here defending what I do or what any of these other chefs do. But I think it's important to make a point that there's room in cooking for far more than fish roasted on the bone with lemon, salt, and olive oil. And it's pretty likely that those restaurants will close anytime soon from lack of patronage and lawsuits brought on by guests that are experiencing, what was it? A bloated, gaseous state brought on by marathon tasting menus. Anyway, so what's really important is I actually talk about what I came here to talk about, which is some of the tools of creativity that some of these restaurants employ, why this style of cooking is actually particularly important, not only to the people that put it forth and take the risk, but the entire gastronomic world, and beyond that, the world in general. Because it really is, and I'm going to tell you why. Food, to me, can be emotional. Now, whether I'm sitting in a park eating simple crudité with mayonnaise, or sitting around a Thanksgiving table with my family, more often than not, the most memorable meals, the most often that I'm brought to some point of emotion is not when I'm eating food that confronts or food that challenges, but more often than not, it's this level of comfort. But that being said, I think it proves the fact that food, dining, the eating, the consumption of food can be, on its most simple level, an emotional experience. You grab the tomato out of the garden, you sprinkle some salt on it, you eat it, that can be profound. So at its very core level, eating and dining can be emotional. If we can agree with that, then it seems likely that food is in fact art. Because the definitions of art, when you look them up in the dictionary, go something like a response, an emotional response from taking something in with the senses. A profession. Hold on, let me read these exactly, because I'm going to mess this up, and this is important. An occupation requiring knowledge or skill. It's pretty vague. The conscious use of skill and creative imagination, especially in the production of aesthetic objects. It's getting a little bit closer to what we do. The emotional reaction brought forth by perception of the senses. That sounds pretty much exactly like what we do. And so, I guess what's important to me and important to modern gastronomy is that we realize that, in fact, food can be art. And I think, for me personally, we speak of, throughout this weekend, the responsibilities of a chef. And Charlie spoke of the charitable ambitions and contributions he's made to society, both in Chicago, nationally and internationally, and that's very admirable. And Chef Seaver and Chef Moonen spoke about standing up for environmental issues, and obviously that impacts us at a very visceral level with what we do. But what if there were no creativity in cooking? What if there were no ingenuity? It seems like it would just be monotonous, static, very dull. And I think what it would happen is it would produce both cooks and chefs and people that would be mindless. To challenge people to think about whatever it is, whether it be food, politics, technology, whatever. To push people to think actually produces, well, first of all, to push people to think. I can't see how that's a bad thing. But it actually inspires. The challenging at any level helps us grow as a society. Whether you're talking about food, like I said, politics, technology, it grows the whole thing forward. And I think that's very important. Food and dining can be fun, it can be provocative, it can be emotional, it can be exhilarating, it can be satisfying on mental and physical levels. I think it's important that we chase that. All right. That was my little rant. Oh my gosh, are we going through here? What is happening? Okay. So today I wanted to talk about Service-Ware. I think this is one avenue that, especially us at Alinea, some of the other more modern restaurants in the country are looking to push cuisine forward, help craft this experience that's original and unique and kind of emotional and charged and fun and entertaining and groundbreaking and all of these things. So the first, we've identified essentially 5 elements, 5 reasons, I guess you would, why we've focused on the Service-Ware, focused on the presentation, focused on how to change the way we eat, the way we present food, and the first one is function. The first thing we have here, the first issue that we tackled, or one of the first issues was, food, plates, forks, knives, bowls, they've been the same for 300 years. Yet gastronomy has moved forward at such a clip at this point that we need to catch up. So one of the things that we addressed first was, now we have this ability to create texture through freezing. Liquid nitrogen, anti-griddles, you name it, it's all out there. So the problem was these foods are so delicate, they're so fragile, they're so fleeting that we need to figure out a way to actually serve them to the guests with their intended texture, with their intended integrity. And one way that we figured that out was make a sleeve, essentially out of glass, that we froze, and it would help us transport the food while maintaining its desired texture. And that's what you see here. Next up, we were confronted with simply serving tempura. You have tempura, you have this crispy, light, delicate batter that often, if surrounded by a vessel, will start to condensate because it's warm. The batter becomes soggy. You lose the integrity of the product. So we designed what we call the working name for the piece is called the squid. It has these delicate wires that protrude up, nestle the tempura not to damage the actual batter, allows air circulation around the tempura so it doesn't condensate, become soggy. And then kind of, in most cases, we have a vertical presentation because we have an element of aroma that usually emanates from the actual tempura. Here you see cinnamon stick. We showed some bay leaf branches. We've done oak branches, vanilla beans, that sort of thing. And this vertical presentation brings the aroma source closer to the guest when it's placed at the table, but also kind of gives you a visual cue of how it should be eaten. It's taken directly out of the squid, and the actual aroma source becomes the utensil. Next, we have our wax bowl. When I first ate at El Bulli in 2000, I had the infamous hot and cold pea soup. And it was the first time that I actually ever experienced the hot and cold sensation on my palate at one time. And it's pretty phenomenal. It's pretty amazing if you've never experienced it. And so it was our desire to try to replicate that sensation. And so I went to Martin and I said, I'm going to make a very simple soup. I'm going to make a truffle soup, truffle and potato soup. I want to serve the soup cold, but I need you to figure out how I can maintain a hot element of the soup. And so he came up with the paraffin wax bowl with the protruding pin. The soup is, like I said, a very simple truffle potato soup, chilled to 45 degrees. The wax is a poor conductor of heat, so it keeps the soup very cold. The pin holding a chunk of Parmesan, a little cube of butter, a chive, and then on the very top, a Parisian scoop of potato that's been cooked in clarified butter at 300 degrees, so it's very hot. Put it on there, put a piece of truffle on, and send it on its way. Obviously, what this allows us to do is keep the temperatures separate until the guest actually, at the last moment, decides to mix the temperatures and then immediately consume the soup so they get the dual temperatures. Another interesting thing about the wax bowl is that the chef de partie actually has to make 100 of those a night. So now you have this great sense of ownership over not only the mise en place, the food mise en place, the soup, the truffle slices, the little cubes of butter, the Parmesan, but actually have to make the bowl. And you saw some of the mold making going on up there. And it gives them a great sense of pride and a great sense of control and ownership, which I find important. This next one was driven primarily by Alex Stupak, whom we had the pleasure of working with in the opening kitchen of Alinea. And he came to me and said, "Chef, I want to serve food that's incredibly intense and incredibly small. And I want a series of 5 bites that they'll progress throughout. But we can't put food the size of a pencil eraser on a plate. First of all, it looks ridiculous. And second of all, you can't physically pick it up. So our solution was just a very thin pin that you would impale the very tiny bite of very intensely flavored food, and bite by bite, in whatever sequence that he determined, you would pluck that off in your mouth and get the sensation over and over again. It's actually really good for pastry chefs because they always complain that everybody's always full at the end of the meal, so this is our way of giving them very small food. Next up, we have one of my favorites, and we call it the paddle. And this is an interesting one because this has more to do with the act of dining, the experience as a whole, looking at it, kind of breaking it apart, trying to meter it in the way you would music. And what this particular service piece allows us to do is actually interrupt a course. So in other words, if a four-top is eating in our dining room and they're halfway through a particular course, the front of the house team will take this service piece that's about this long with small bites of food on it, and they'll come up to the table and actually interrupt the table. They'll interject. It'll be like a wedge, almost. The conversation will be going on, and they'll politely excuse themselves and kind of come in and interrupt with this food. And it breaks a certain cadence in the meal. It breaks a pace. But from the chef's perspective, it allows you to introduce a flavor, a texture, an aroma, something outside of the composition that you plated and presented in front of the guest. So it's almost like throwing a piece of paper at somebody when they're halfway through a meal and hitting them in the head. You have the opportunity to interject something new, whether it be a texture or a flavor, that can enhance the dish in some way, make it more complex, make actually the entire dining experience more complex, because now you're taking control of a window that's very narrow. which normally was off limits to chefs. Normally when you put the plate down, normally when the plate leaves the kitchen, it's out of your control and you've kissed it goodbye and you can no longer touch it. But now, we have the ability, once we let go control, we can actually come back into it, reintroduce ourselves to it in some way, and change it while it's being consumed, which I think is an interesting element. This is just our solution to the ever popular rolled up napkin propping the spoon or fork up on the plate dilemma that most chefs have. We call it the anti-plate. Simply holds a fork or spoon in an upright position or a vertical position. Allows the guest to easily pluck it out. We've done this both by course, or we've rid it larger for use in like canapé situations where you're carrying around 10 spoons on a tray, and the guest can just easily pluck it off. The next images here are for larger service pieces that we've developed for use in event-type situations where we had to feed a lot of people at one time. And as I showed you there with that opening image, the human dynamic is very interesting when you have kind of this experiment where you have 600 people in front of you and they all want food at one time and they're all eating together, and sometimes you lose a sense of privacy. It sort of happens at times. But it's an interesting kind of aspect to a group situation where normally the chef loses complete control of the situation. You're forced with an event, people are kind of coming up at will, and this is kind of our way of controlling that environment. And presenting the food in a manner that we feel it's intended to be enjoyed. This is a row of stainless steel wire that holds like 50 pieces of dehydrated bacon, and people can come up and pluck. But the point with these larger service pieces is that the intended effect that's at the restaurant, all of the principles that we apply to presenting food at the restaurant is translated into a group situation. And the last sequence here is the very first service piece that we ever collaborated on with Martin. I went to him and said, I want to present essentially a frozen lollipop. I want you to build me a plate with holes in it or a tray that holds a bunch of these things so I can pass them out. And of course, him being a designer and me being a chef, he actually had the viable solution, the intelligent solution, which was, let's make the lollipop holder support itself. And we call this a tripod for obvious reasons. It has 3 legs that when you grasp all 3, they collapse into one, and it becomes very interactive. It's an important element of our cuisine, this engagement with the diner, this kind of interaction, making them participate in a way that is a little bit more atypical. So next up we have the sheer aesthetics of presentation. As chefs, we always focus on the way our food looks. I remember when I was working at my father's family-style diner, I was always the guy that was like reaching for the little parsley sprig to put on the omelet, twisting the orange and putting it on the hash browns and that sort of thing. And you always kind of want to make food look a little bit better. It's an important, we touched on it a couple of times throughout the Congress. I know, I think it was Morimoto talked about it and a few others where, there's always that cliche saying where you eat with your eyes first. And of course that that is true, I suppose. But more importantly, what we try to focus on is trying to accentuate the properties of the food, the actual qualities of the food. What does the food possess that we can play off of to accentuate, to make that a more unified whole, to make the presentation, the function, the flavor all kind of work in synergy. So here you see our dehydrated bacon with butterscotch, thyme, and apple. And what we're trying to do by hanging it on this bow is accentuate the translucent quality of the dried fat. It's essentially, you can see right through it. As opposed to lying this on the plate where no light is coming through. Here you have Alex's rosewater envelope, which is essentially a fruit roll-up, if you will, made from rose flower water that encases a granola of roses and Mediterranean flavors and granola spiced with curry and whatnot. So here you have, again, we could put that on a plate. You could lie it on a plate. It would taste exactly the same. You would pick it up. You would eat it. You would like it. That's fine. But playing off of the natural characteristics of the actual food that you've made, why not try to present it in a fashion that highlights it even more, that makes it even more interesting, that shows the qualities that you've actually tried to put forth? And that's what we do in this case. A couple of more images here that kind of go in line with that. Some of these we try to introduce other aspects of presentation. We have a couple of the service pieces like the bow with the bacon, and a couple others like the clip that holds this raspberry are actually rounded on the bottom. So when they get set down on the table, they sway back and forth gently, introducing a motion aspect. It's kind of just a light swaying. It makes the food a little bit more alive. All of this stuff I feel is important when we're trying to wrap our heads around like this sense of engagement and participation from the actual diner. And this is why we put so much effort into creating these service pieces and accentuating the natural properties of the food, showing a little bit more detail, having fun with it. Like we don't take ourselves too seriously. You simply can't. I mean, we're putting forth food that, you know, is presented on things that are growing and things exploding in your mouth and telling people to eat with no hands and this sort of thing. Like, it can't be pretentious, and that all lends to the experience. It makes it enjoyable and makes it fun. One important aspect is actually the mechanics of eating. And if you think about it, you're 2 years old, you start to eat with a spoon, out of a jar, off a bowl, plate, whatever. And it's that motion, it's that constant motion, that repetitive motion of bringing food from the table surface to your actual mouth with the same utensils off of the same surfaces 3 times a day, 4 times a day, 5 times a day for the rest of your life. So we all know that the more times you do something, the more repetitive it is, the less likely you're actually going to notice what you're doing. I don't think people really have to focus on eating. Like when you're actually taking that fork and stabbing a piece of food and putting it in your mouth, I don't think you're like focusing on it. You just do it because you know where your mouth is and you know where your hands are and you know how to move them because you've done them for years. But what if we broke that? What if we actually said, you know what, we're gonna try to have it where you eat a little bit differently, I think you're going to take a little bit more notice, not only of the act of eating, but what you're eating. And that's kind of our point with this. Here you have what we call the antenna. And it's basically a skewer, holds one bite of food, elevates it off the table about 14 inches, and you eat it with no hands. Front of the house team instructs you to lean forward, pluck the food off the end of the wire. It's the same exact food that I could give you on a fork. We could put it on a plate and have you eat it with a knife and fork. Completely different experience. Totally different experience. Something that's more complex. You have an emotional reaction to it. You're intimidated. You're in a 4-star restaurant. You're supposed to be prim and proper. You're dressed well. You made the reservation 2 months ago. You're nervous. You're with a date. And then the service team comes in and says, eat this off the end of the wire without your hands. People laugh. People refuse to do it. They say, there's no way, I'm subjecting I got a room full of people looking at me, there's no way I'm going to do that. They're intimidated. But you know what, that's good. Isn't it good? Chef? You can really tell a personality of a person if they refuse to eat the antenna. Where were we? Here we go. A couple more examples of the mechanics of eating. Here we have what we call a sectional plate. Essentially, it's an upright spoon, if you will, a pedestal. It's kind of like a wine glass that we chopped off right at the bottom, or a spoon that we elevated up. It gives the chef control to a certain degree, because now we can put these one-bite compositions together and form a tasting menu within a tasting menu. You know, you look at, coming up here, you have the Hearts of Palm again. And the whole concept with that particular course was, we're going to give you Hearts of Palm. We're going to give you 5 different flavors that accompany the Hearts of Palm. And we're going to encourage you to eat them in a certain order. So we literally place them on the table, going from lightest to heaviest, away from the guests, and tell them to eat one by one, working away from themselves. And again, people can complain about control. They can complain about people directing them on how to eat. But in fact, I think if you're eating at a restaurant like this, you should trust the chef. And if he says, eat the carrot first and eat the pumpernickel last, that's what I would do. This is our way of controlling that little block of time and making sure the guest enjoys it as it was intended. A couple more, a little bit repetitive. This one here is fun. Simply nothing high-tech about it. Just a vellum paper, a vellum envelope, if you will, that we fill with various things. Here it's shown with dehydrated savory ingredients: garlic, oregano, red pepper, black olive. Literally, the guest picks that up off the table, tears the end off, and shoots it back like a savory pixie stick. And again, we're talking about the transportation of food that wouldn't normally be able to be put on a plate and spooned up. And if so, how would you know what proportions the guest was actually going to get in their mouth? So this is our way of controlling that, having them take those bites as they were intended. Next up, we focus a little bit more on the emotional aspects of eating at the restaurant. Everybody has anticipation when they eat out. Some restaurants, like Alinea, many, many others, now don't even give guests menus. You come in, you sit down, whatever. I'm at the mercy of the chef, whatever he wants to do. So every course is anticipated. Every course is exciting. You never know what's going to hit the table. Here's kind of a pullback moment or a pullback aspect of that, where we're trying to provide a more provocative, like emotional point to the meal, intrigue, if you will. So what happens is we'll come over and put a particular item on the table that has both aesthetic value and eventually functional value. And this came about because when we were looking to open the restaurant, we said, what are we going to do with the tabletop? Are we going to have a tablecloth? Are we going to preset with wine glasses? Are we going to have flatware down? No, because it doesn't make any sense for us. Are we going to have a bouquet of roses in the middle of the table? Seasonal floral arrangement for an aesthetic purpose? No, we're not going to do that either because it's very one-dimensional. So what we decided to do is try to incorporate the aesthetic element, the beauty object, if you will, and eventually make it a functional, a participatory object in the meal. So we've come up with a series of what we call edible centerpieces. Here you have ginger. This is our very first one. The ginger gets carved in the kitchen. It gets impaled with the pins. It goes out, gets placed in the middle of the table. At some point, a member of the front of the house team picks up the ginger and begins to grate it. Produces a wonderful aroma. The juice is oozing out of the ginger, and eventually he drips it over a composition that works with ginger juice. In this case, it was a deconstructed A1 sauce, if you will, that was applied to Wagyu beef. In this case, you have honeycomb. Pretty surprising to me how many guests didn't know what this was when we set it down on the table. They would ask all the time, what is this object? What is this? Well, that's honeycomb. That's where honey comes from. It's pretty interesting. Anyway, so the honeycomb goes down. It's an object of beauty. It captures the light in the room. It glows on the table. People love it as an object, and then eventually it's crushed. We put it in a sleeve. We extract the honey. It gets drizzled over a pork dish, over a fish dish, over desserts that, of course, work well with honey. Rosemary, in a way, one of the more traditional centerpieces that we've done, in that it's a plant form, and one expects to see some type of plant on the middle of the table when they dine at the restaurant. However, this one took a little bit different turn because it helped us actually flavor a dish by the way of aroma. So what happens is the rosemary becomes the chopstick holder or the utensil holder, and then eventually a brick that's heated to 500 degrees in the kitchen. Lamb is placed on the brick, starts to cook. Itself produces the aroma of roasting lamb, goes out to the table. Front of the house team takes that rosemary from the center of the table, places it in a hole that's in the brick, and the heat activates the rosemary, imbibes the diner with the rosemary fragrance, thereby flavoring the lamb dish. We have one more here, two more. This one was key lime. where we shrink wrapped in plastic, like a plastic tubing. The limes are eventually punctured with a custom-made impaling instrument. They're squeezed at the table, and because they're shrink-wrapped, it becomes not only a vase for the sake of presenting the lime, but also containing the lime juice. It makes a very easy pourer for the service team to distribute the lime juice over, in this case, a guava dessert with avocado and rum, basil elements, pine nuts. Lastly, we have the current service piece. A very thinly sliced piece of Japanese Wagyu ribeye that's been cured with salt and sugar and black pepper, sandwiched in between the two wooden pieces and dipped in liquid nitrogen. It's frozen, obviously, pretty extremely, and holds this frozen state for about 27 minutes. And what we were trying to do with this particular course was show the transition between the frozen Wagyu and watching it unfold in front of the guests, adding this kind of complex experience where it starts out being white, as you saw, smoking, full of condensate that's frozen, and then eventually thaws at the table, becomes bright red again, and then is draped over, in this case, a maitake mushroom that's been roasted, garnished with some vinaigrette, some herb flour, and that's it for that one. So essentially, to summarize, let me get a drink. Through the service pieces, we're trying to craft an experience. It's one way, it's one tool, it's one avenue of creativity that helps us create an experience, like I said, that's fun, it's entertaining, it's at times intimidating, it's new, and it's functional, and it has purpose. And that's one thing that I really want to stress and kind of dispel, is that everything that we do should have purpose. And it's not done for the sake of being new and being innovative and being creative, because that, in fact, is not being a responsible chef. Being a responsible chef is putting forth new ideas in a respectful, purposeful, functional way. And I think that's what we do. That's the end of my show. Will Blunt.
Hello. We're going to take a few questions, but just if you'll indulge us for 1 minute, we would like to thank everyone that made this possible, everyone that has been working for months on this event. And internally, we have Heather Sperling in the second row, our captains, Heather Sperling, Liz Sorrentino, and Renata.
Karen Albert and Katie Adams and Kenneth Knox and Zach.
Everyone. But our entire team for
and Vicky for the photography.
Making all the sacrifices and making this possible. It's, you know, we're just a small fraction of the, you know, the effort here. Also wanted to thank Wizard Studios for doing the yeoman's work of setting everything up and breaking everything down. And FCI.
And Lindsay and John Proville and David. And if I'm forgetting any StarChef staff, I'm sorry, but there's 21 of you who, without you, this event would never, ever have happened. And everybody has to applaud our staff. Who did I forget?
FCI now.
Okay. And for FCI, Dave Arnold, Nils Noren, Annette Tomey, Angela, Junior Marino, who ran our mixology program, and Julie Resendez, who ran our sommelier program, the Park Avenue Armory for having us, and the Wizard staff, who's put up with our ups and downs for 2 years now. And thank you to Wizard, and to Matt, and to Susan.
And Tal and his team for
And
the
Tal and
fantastic-
his team, and Sean for putting up the stage.
Just everyone out there, thank you so much for all those personal sacrifices. We'll see you next year, and let's take some questions now.
Who's got a question?
Hi, Grant.
Where we at?
Right here.
Oh, I know you.
Yeah, you know me. About a month ago, you showed me a draft of your new book.
Uh-huh.
And I was real excited to see that come together. When is everyone going to get a chance to see it?
Next week. We had the bulk of the copies land in the Oakland port last week, and they're being distributed right now through all the major channels. So Amazon and Barnes & Noble and Borders and whatnot should start to receive them all next week. So, of course, we're going to get our shipment first. So those of you that pre-purchase the book, we're going to get our mailing out before they get on the store shelves. So you should see it sometime next week.
Hey, Grant. What's up, Grant?
There we are.
Sorry. I just want to say I had probably the single best experience of my life having the Wagyu Kobe over the dates with the mushroom and the sage, and I don't know how you did it, but I didn't at first understand why that piece of beef was just hanging over there for 27 minutes.
Right.
But when it finally went over that dish and then you spilled the vinaigrette, I got it, and it was incredible. And I just
Great.
wanted to comment.
Thank you.
Questions? Any curiosity?
I'm Laura Curtis. I'm a CIA student. Hello, Chef Achatz. A friend and I were having the conversation about chefs as artists, and he made the comment that other artists, musicians or painters, can use their craft to make a wider social commentary on, war or political sentiments, whereas chefs, we're really slaves to pleasure. We have to provide a pleasurable experience for our diners. Would you agree with that, or do you think we have a wider?
Yeah, I don't know that I'm going to create a tasting menu that's going to raise political agendas or awareness. But I think we can affect people on a much broader scale than just simply what's going on at the table on a given night. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Mircini from Guatemala, and I wanted to ask your opinion. You were talking about the chefs that we saw, and I couldn't agree with you anymore, because I think they're being selfish, telling young people that the experience in the restaurants. I was working in El Bulli when I saw Anthony Bourdain get the decoding Ferran Adrià and see him to enjoy very much that meal. So I don't know what he was talking about. I just want to congratulate you because you are one of the best, and I admire you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Hi, Grant.
Hi.
My name is Lisa Bett. I'm from Florida, and I just wanted to say also that I appreciate what you pointed out about the controversy that took place and you illuminating it today with your comments. I wanted to put something out there to add that my comments and impressions from a layperson's point of view, and that is that perhaps next year Antoinette and Will might consider having a forum that Ruhlman moderates with Grant and Marco Pierre on the same stage.
Yeesh.
But
I don't know.
moreover, if you look at what Marco Pierre White's point of view and perspective embodies, I think it's 40 years of gastronomy that began in the late 60s in post-World War II France and is ending now. And you represent the movement of the next 40 years. And combined with that transition, you have a very unique 100 years of gastronomy. And that is the most scintillating, single, exciting thing about being alive today and being a chef. And that your work is so beautiful and pure. And I think you have many aspects that are also in common with the type of work representative of what Chef White was speaking about as well, in terms of the respect for the product and technique, and the isolation and the creativity that Charlie Trotter spoke about. So thank you, and it's beautiful,
Thank you.
your work.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions?
Yeah, I have one. At Alinea, you had a shot or shot glass, and there was a ball containing a liquid. I think I remember, but I think it's very interesting, something to talk about.
You wanted to know, like, what was it? How was it made? Yes, I can't recall which one in particular you've had, but it was the one that we've had on the menu for quite a while, and it rotates through the seasons. But essentially, all it is we freeze a liquid in a spherical ice cube tray, and then dip that frozen sphere into a mixture of cocoa butter, in some cases juices of very potent vegetables like horseradish, vinegar, any kind of flavoring agent. The base is cocoa butter. So it goes in, the cocoa butter goes in the refrigerator. Obviously, the ice melts back to a liquid. The cocoa butter remains rigid. And then that goes in the shot glass, and that's what pops in your mouth.
Hello? I just want to we forgot one big thank you. Just want to thank Mike Colomecco, who's come out for 2 days to guide us through the program. I forgot.
Grant, I just want to ask you, when you and your team are hiring kitchen staff, what are the things that go through your mind where you are now?
What do we look for?
Yes.
We look for the same thing that everybody looks for. Dedication, eagerness, passion, work ethic. You know, what we do is not really, it's not as technique driven as it might appear. Really, anybody can learn it in a short amount of time, but what really is the missing variable is the people that are willing to commit to the vision, willing to commit to the philosophy, and dedicate themselves to it. And it doesn't matter if it's Alinea or any other restaurant. It's all the same. It's all about, passion and focus. It's hard to identify, and it's hard to find, but that's what we're looking for. Yeah.
Hi, Grant. I have a question up here. Over here.
There we go.
Hi, how are you? My name is Pam, and you are a part of an elite group in experimental food right now. From the client's point of view, who is clearly paying all of the bills in your restaurant, and the staff, and everything else, do you find that your clients leave in awe, in surprise, sated, satisfied, and or confused?
Hopefully all of those.
Okay.
I hope. But primarily we hope they leave satisfied on both, on both a mental and a physical level. We want people to leave full, and we want them to leave and, mentally challenged. We want to interject that cerebral element,
One more?
Okay, I think then we'll call the 2008 third annual International Chefs Congress a wrap. And let's thank Chef Grant Achatz for a wonderful presentation.